Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we are once again discussing on more educational subjects and more about the fabric of our society in relation to how we came to create the current crisis, the systematic problems that we have, wherein sometimes we just focus too much on economics and the whole financial crisis and so forth. But many times we miss out the fact that many problems, or most of the problems, actually begin from the very early stages in our lives in this world, which is then shaped by where we live, the education that we get, our parents, and essentially society. So we do consider that it is very relevant to start discussing this and to create this awareness of what the title of this hangout is, which is the politics of your education. And first of all, beginning with the idea that, education is political. And we haven't really maybe considered that before until we start realizing that the way that we perceive our reality, our society, is something that is taught, that is comprehended as we go living in this world and in our educational processes. So today we are mostly going to be discussing about this with practical examples and our own experiences as people from around the world that have realized this aspect for ourselves. So we have two guests today. We have Anna Brix from Sweden. Hi, Anna.
Hi, everyone.
And we have Martijn de Graaf from the Netherlands. Hi, Martijn.
Hi, everyone.
So thanks a lot, guys, for being here today. And let's begin with you, Martijn. We have a very interesting situation going on here when we discover that people, relating to one another as adults, we have certain conditioning of who the politician is or should be, or how the system is and has always been, why, for example, you live in a first world country, why others are in poverty. What have you discovered with regards to this aspect of how you were educated is essentially already a political imprint within you?
Yeah. Yes. When I was a kid, I discovered that there were poor countries more to the east, in Eastern Europe, and we were wealthier in Holland, and I assumed that our wealth would spread. So after a few years, I visited those countries, and I came to the conclusion that they were still poor. So that was a question to myself: how come our wealth doesn't spread? And instead, we became more and more luxurious. So there was something not going in the sense of equality. And later on, I learned that there were poor countries in Africa. That was Biafra in that time, where people were so very poor that they died. Many of them died, and they were with too little help to be saved. And so I learned that there were even more poor people, and that there was, and it was like that was a fact. It was just how it is in the world. So many years later, I found out that we have an economic system which is organized in a way that money and resources are all going to the wealthy countries, and that the poor countries have no chance to get developed, to get to the same level of development. And that is something that I wasn't taught in school. I had to find it out for myself. So that was a very strange discovery.
So it is essentially how, through education, through how our history is taught, you get to know you are first world country, you are born into this marvelous wealth. You have these kings and queens that you have to essentially obey or accept as how the system operates, not really questioning it. And it is that question, of course, because you have that good living standard, so to speak. But when we go on to, for example, in my situation, being third world country, you get to learn that you've been conquered and that you've been oppressed, and that you are then meant to kind of remain in that mentality that, yes, you are a third world country and there's no way out of it. It's just how things operate. What's going on here? And I'd like to hear your perspective on this as well.
Well, the thing is that we tend to believe, and we are taught that whatever we're learning in school, whatever we're taught is the reality. So when you learn history in Mexico, you learn that this is the history. When I learn history in Sweden, or when Martijn learns history in Holland, we learn that this is the history. No one tells us that what you're going to learn now is the perspective of the world from our perspective. And you know what is also so interesting is that the person who is teaching you that, the teacher, they have obviously themselves been taught that. So, you know, there's this complete collective perception that this is real. And exactly as Martijn was explaining, to me, this was something I didn't realize until I was in my final years in the university. So you can consider how many years of indoctrination I had to go through, believing that everything I learned was just reality. That, you know, this and this king and this war, and our country was on that side in the conflict. And you think, okay, well, you know, they are the adults, I have to trust them, that's what happened. And then what also starts happening is what Martijn was saying, is that you start going like, but wait a minute, this is perhaps not the only side of the story. And it can come as quite a shock when you realize that there are other ways of seeing the world. And then obviously, for example, in your case, as coming from a third world country, and you're being taught actually through a self-perpetuating education, because it is the very oppressed people who are teaching the children that you too are oppressed, is that it perpetuates that same exact victimized state of inferiority. I've seen it also, for example, in Denmark with people from the Philippines, or people from Thailand, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And it is placing themselves in superior positions in the world to have cultures and countries of people who see themselves as inferior, as oppressed, as victimized, because it creates an entire world scenario, like a hierarchy, where everyone accepts their condition and their situation as though that's how it's always been, like it's in our genes.
Yeah.
But we don't realize that it's a version of history, that actual history is the collective history of everyone on Earth together, and no one has the right version.
No.
So we have now like the context of how we are born. We are taught that you're first world country, third world country at an economic level. But what happens also at the level of social responsibility? Because that's where also there's another aspect of politics, in essence, in our education. First, you're taught, okay, if you're poor, then you're like essentially not able to be aspiring to become the wealthy person that you see others in another part of the world can be, or vice versa, that you're shielded from poverty just because you're born in this or that country.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also another aspect of education that it's linked to how you're taught, in essence, in school. Like, everything is given in a certain manner so that you are already predetermined to act or participate in a particular manner in the system. What was your experience on this, Martijn?
Holland was a colonizer. We conquered a lot of other people in other parts of the world. And in school we were taught that it was just trade. So we didn't learn that we essentially robbed the people and enslaved the people. And even our former prime minister, he said that we needed that mentality again in our country. It's called the VOC mentality. So that is very crazy that such a criminal way of trading, which cannot even be called trading, that it is still accepted as a good thing to make profit and to flourish as a country. So I was told that the people that conquered other countries who were also colonizers, that were our heroes, you know. So yeah, so now it seemed to me that being wealthy as Holland was the normal thing, was the right thing. It was we made it ourselves, and little did I know that we robbed our wealth from other people. So yeah, so that made me feel like we as a country are all right, and the countries that are poor and not wealthy, they lack something, and a lot of people in Holland believe that those people are lazy and they have no initiative, and so we shouldn't even give them money because they have to stand up for themselves. And what we're not taught is the secret ways in which our country takes away money and resources from the countries that are poorer than ourselves.
So at a social level, that just became like part of, yeah, like we made good business and that's why we're wealthy. But
Exactly.
and that created like the sense of that's how we interact with the world. We just
Yes.
make good businesses and there's no social responsibility entailed at all because there's the mindset created as education, as your history that you did well. Right?
Yeah, we worked for it and now it's our right to be wealthy.
And that's also a very important aspect that is ingrained within how the system operates. When there's this belief system, I mean, we've reviewed how the money operates, money as a belief system, and education at times, you know, it is acting in the same manner to the point where in the way how you are taught to see reality based on a particular hierarchy. There is poverty, there is wealth, there is kings, there is the ones that will follow the king. You have to pay this because they are the kings, so you have to pay your taxes, you have to get this education because otherwise you cannot make it in the system. This is all actually taught in our school system. So Anna, what can you tell us about this aspect of how this influences the way that we not only interact with one another, but as members of society?
Yeah, so something that I've seen is that because it is taught in a very subtle way and it's very implicit, we tend to not actually realize or know that we're carrying these hierarchical ways of seeing the world and seeing other people. And so exactly as Martijn was saying, when there are then immigrants, for example, coming to Sweden, they will then be looked down upon or maybe even feared, or they will be seen as not part of us. And the entire, you could say, the entire process of how that person have gotten to be in that situation where they have had to feed their country either due to how our country not seen, because as we could see from Martijn's example, that is not taught in school, and it is certainly not taught in school either that since we now played a part sorry, in creating these circumstances, we also have a responsibility to, we're now in a position of relative abundance and harmony, so we could actually now begin a process of helping other countries stabilize and create an effective infrastructure.
Yeah.
So that's, I would say that is one of the ways. And then even in our interaction with each other as human beings, that it becomes an integrated part of how we see each other. That I am light, you are dark, so I am automatically, almost on a biological level, like more intelligent. You know, many people, it's something we would never consciously admit. That would be horrible. You know, I'm not a racist, but it exists integrated into us and affects the way that we approach other people, that we do not see them as equals or interact with them as equals. And it makes it so much easier to justify, for example, having a maid from the Philippines who is actually, which you might not know, she maybe is educated as a doctor, but she could make more money working as a maid in Holland or in Sweden.
Sure.
And you then justify that because, you know, well, problem. So I would say that this has tremendous consequences in our lives and in our societies, but it is happening at a very subtle level, and that is what is making it, you know, that it keeps going on, and that's why it's so important that we expose this even within ourselves and in our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And also, you know, it all begins by people now being joined through the marvelous tool that the internet is, because we wouldn't have been able to actually cross-reference this kind of stuff maybe 20 years ago. It wasn't possible. No. So it is this time, it is really interesting times to be alive in and to be part of the creation of this awareness of how we have been like isolated in these bubbles called nations, which we have to remember that they're not naturally created forces of nature that decide which countries who or what race was meant to be superior. We're talking about constructs that have been created the same way that we created the money, for example. It is a belief system. It is something that we agreed upon or just tacitly agreed upon by being born into it, and we have come to just continue that regressive mentality that, you know, this is how things are and how things should be, and through education that gets perpetuated, that gets continually just passed on from generation to generation. So what we are proposing as part of, you know, proposing a change at an economic, political level is, of course, that one of the main weapons, so to speak, used to perpetuate the system as is education. And it begins and exists within this seemingly subtle or seemingly inherent aspects in which we see at each other based on race, gender, nationality, and so forth. Martijn, would you like to share more points in relation to what Anna discussed?
Everything, yeah. Now the consequences that we, as a rich country, always had put aside into the poor countries, those consequences are now on our doorstep. In Holland, we have growing poverty. It is rising fast. A lot of people are thrown out of their houses and are dependent, and it's horrible, really. So finally, more people are waking up to the economic facts of the unequal distribution of wealth. And this is a very good time to come with a new proposal, like the basic income or the living income, to alleviate poverty. And so we are now working on a political party to have a platform for people who see the common sense of providing everybody with a living income. So yeah, that's what we are working on now, to also to give the education about the money system and the politics that are behind it.
That is an interesting point. Like, for example, Anna, how would you see that if we were able to now decide how education is directed, how to create a genuine supportive education, how would that change how we not only operate in our societies, but how we view the world? And what would you suggest for that as part of the solutions as well?
Okay, so we have to realize that our education, the way that it exists, it is political. We're kind of deceived into believing that it is neutral, that we're learning what we're supposed to learn. But if we can look at that equation and we look at what comes out in the other end of the education system, is the world, is our societies. Those societies are created by people who are educated to see the world in a specific way, and they will then act based on that way. For example, through consumerism, through competition, okay? So we only have to look at the consequence of what exists in the world as wars, as increasing inequality, to see that we can trace that back to an ineffective education system. So the solution in terms of changing the education system is, first of all, to realize and admit that to ourselves. And that also goes out to parents, to teachers, to anyone that works with children, to realize that what we're being taught is not the only way. And it is affecting the entire world. Obviously, each country's education system, each school has like particular nuances or ways of doing that. So simply by changing that one point, by emphasizing critical assessment skills for children, by teaching children to do research, by, for example, not saying to them, this is history, but to say, this is history as we have been taught it. How about going and researching another country's history, how they see the world? Already by doing such a very simplistic thing, the entire world opens up in a different way, and you get access to different ways of seeing the world. And that is required for us to eventually see the world commonsensically, which would be, you know, like any child can understand, but that we as adults have very big trouble seeing, that we're living on this round planet and we have to coexist. That is the most basic point of all, and that should be the first foundation of our education system. So how can we coexist? How can we coexist with others? How can we coexist with nature? And the school system is kind of pretending that it's doing this, but I would say that all of us knows, all of us who's been through it or who have children in it, we know that that is not so. So much of what we're being taught through the school system is happening in the way we're being taught, in the passive delivery of knowledge and information, where you're taught to not ask questions and what questions not to ask. And kids learn that they cannot ask the hard questions. Why are we here? Why are people suffering? Why are people starving in Africa? Why are there wars? You know, these fundamental, very important questions that we should be asking ourselves are not being brought up in the school system. So I would say that simply making very, very basic changes in what we're teaching children, how we're teaching children, that in itself could provide a major change in the world as a whole.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, and also what we have always missed out is that, you know, this that you explain of how to coexist, how to create agreements, how to realize that politics shouldn't be like the reality show that we see mostly on the news and they cannot come to an agreement. That also becomes kind of part of our outside of the school education, so to speak, of how politics operates and how the world operates. So, I mean, I remember in school being said like, yeah, this is how the political system operates, but oh, as you know, no one can ever agree with what is right or what can be done. So even from there, you get conditioned that, you know, that system is kind of not working properly, but those are the ones that rule you. And so you get like, well, so what can I do about it? It seems that I won't ever be able to make any change in the world because it doesn't work. Like politics is not working. And that's also part of what is being currently, you know, at a cultural level being kind of impulsed, that politics is rotten, instead of realizing that no, it's just a tool. Just as education is a tool, politics is a tool with which to learn how to coexist the best way possible. And education is just the platform, the method in which to create that practical process of learning how to do it.
Yeah.
So we tend to judge the parts of our reality like, oh, politics, it's nonsense. Oh, education is just a fixed indoctrination system. No, they work like that because we have accepted that to remain as is, to co-create that status quo, like not changing. But if we start all, becoming more aware of how we can use what is already here for the betterment of everyone, then it's just a matter of changing the starting point of our education system, changing the starting point of how politics operate, and so get to realize that if we all see that a change is required, then common sense is actually easy to get to if we all place ourselves into the active position of participating, just like we're doing, getting together, even from separate nations, but to understand that there are solutions that we all agree on, such as, yes, if there's a poverty, a majority of poverty in the world, then we have to upgrade that living standard so that maybe people can live in what we could call a first world standard living in a sustainable manner. So, Martijn, I would like to ask you about that because you were mentioning that Holland has been, the epitome of one of the countries that went out there, made a lot of wealth from other countries.
Yeah.
So would you agree that then it's like also a point of responsibility to set the example maybe of how to do things now the right way, so to speak, and how would that work?
Yes, for sure. But the problem is that the Dutch people are, although they have put a lot of work into Holland to rebuild it after the Second World War, people have become lazy in a way, especially in the point of government and politics, because they had wealth. So people were so consumed by their consumerism that they forgot about the government, and well, they had the impression that government was taking care of them, and that was okay, and they gave themselves to entertainment and buying stuff and lived a good life. So what we have now is that people wake up like, what is politics doing? All kind of strange decisions are made in this country, and I don't agree, but yeah, what can I do about it? So there is no political awareness. No, it has to start from the beginning, really. And also, democracy, nobody knows what it is, democracy. We only know that we vote once in 4 years, and that's all that we know about democracy. So how do you do that? How do you speak in a group in a democratic way? How do you make decisions in a democratic way? We have to invent it all from the beginning. It is just not here.
And also, I mean, taken from that perspective, it is that to also kind of demystify the idea that, people, because they're wealthy, they are supreme or they know better. Now you're kind of confirming that we're all just on the same level, and we all have to just kind of step out of our cocoons, either of being better than or inferior than, and get to that level of, well, nothing of this system has genuinely worked. Because if it had worked, then we wouldn't be seeking for solutions. Not even in Holland, not even in Mexico, not anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
So that's like a point of acceptance that also Anna mentioned quite accurately. That's the first point of humbleness, so to speak. Nothing of the system has worked. It has all been quite of a lie that we have created, and that we have the power to change and to actively create in a way that is beneficial. And that's something that I consider it's very important, regardless of where in the world we are. That sense of responsibility that should be part of our education for the most part, so that we stop seeing nations and history and cultures and races but start just considering, as Anna was mentioning as well, like these coexistence, we're in the same world, so why not thinking globally in a way that is not, no, I'm going to enslave that country to make myself richer, but to actually consider, okay, I want people to have the best living condition, the best living standard. How can I contribute to that? And I see that that's a responsibility regardless of where we are in the world, for sure, and kind of step out of that mentality that I only work with those of my nation, for example, or those of my political ideology, get past that ideology, that nationality, and get to common ground, so to speak.
Yeah.
We have a question, and this is about education, Anna, so this goes for you. This is from Gabriel, and he's saying, it's in Spanish, I'm going to translate it. For a long time, there's been the idea that education should be free and secular. Regardless, what we have seen is that politics has become some kind of religion, and that the great majority of countries that declare their educational system within this posture as secular and free, we still see a deliberate manipulation within the education system to amalgamate, which means to bind, a mentality that is inclined to perpetuate the acceptance of such system.
Yeah.
So, which perspectives do you have about this?
Yeah, so this is what is so interesting and what is so deceptive, and why such conversations as this one is important. Because this idea of education being free and secular, and not only free and secular, but also equal, that in itself is an entire deception. And I would say that politics has never been separated from education. Education has always been a political project, because, you know, someone figured out that through teaching the children a specific material in a specific way, they grow up and become adults that see the world in a specific way. So this is something that has been known always. But in previous societies, it was either only certain people who had access to education, or education was more diverse in that there was not like national curricular, there was no common core, so that meant that the teacher had a lot more responsibility and a lot more freedom to teach based on their own creativity and their own insights. So what happened from my perspective, for example, if we take Europe or if we take Scandinavia, where I am from, where we have a so-called free and secular education system, is that, you know, first you had the monks who were the only one who could read and write, and then you had the what do you call it, the rich people, who, the elite basically, who then were taught to read and write. And then what I have learned in my history is that then came the people's education. Then education was made free for everyone, and it was so wonderful, and the farmers and the workers had access to education. Right, that's the history we know. But what is not considered is that this coincided with a lot of revolutions, with a lot of rebellion happening in the world. So it was seen as, well, let's educate everyone in the same way, into the same mentality, so that we can prevent such rebellion, such revolting. So that through education, people are actually being contained in a specific mindset, whereas before, because they didn't have access to that form of education, they had to teach themselves to read and write, and they had apprenticeships, so it was much more intimate. And within the community, within the villages, to now being mass education coming directly from the centralized government, with a specific aim of educating people into a certain mindset. So this is something that we are not taught in our normal mainstream history, that you actually have to start going digging for and investigating the history of education to realize how extensively that deception goes.
Yeah. True. Yes.
Martijn, any perspectives?
Yes.
Go for it.
I see that we, in the wealthy countries, we have the responsibility, because we have the means to spread the education about these points. We have the internet, we have the little bit of finance, not so much here, but so yes, without this seeing through the programming that exists, that you get from the education system, without seeing through that, we are still divided in sections. And I remember, for instance, that in school at the end of when I was like 17 years old, we were supposed to join in politics. We had to learn about political parties, etc. And to me, it was obvious that communism was the solution, because everything would be shared and equality would be the norm. And to my surprise, a lot of other students didn't like communism. And later on, I went to communist countries, and there I saw that communism was not at all what I had in mind about sharing and equality. It was a kind of dictatorship, and yeah. So this whole idea of sharing and equality is like in a very bad perspective placed by what communism was in the world. So when I talk to people about equality and sharing and building community, and a lot of people reject that because of communism. And so we have to overcome so much history, so much education and politics.
That's a cool example.
What is necessary. To see what is necessary, the normal physical things. Okay, go ahead.
Which is something that is very overlooked, and we've talked before about cognitive dissonance in terms of how through education we get these, like the way in which we see and understand reality and so forth. But when we start realizing that education has been mostly at times a conditioning, an indoctrination, a lie, so to speak, that's where we also very much encourage self-education, which is, now that we have the internet, as you're mentioning, educating ourselves, sharing with each other from mouth to mouth, as we're doing in this conversation, and everyone is invited to do so, and you can place questions as we are now live. And because this is where we actually go creating that sense of awareness that there is something that we haven't yet considered, and that is that if we can use such a powerful tool as education to maintain such same system of oppression, of control, of inequality, of hierarchical structures, then we can use the same education to create essentially a new way of understanding our humanity, of coexisting, of learning how to consider others in how we live, in maybe focusing even not so much on only gaining a lot of knowledge that we won't ever use, but practical ways to coexist and so forth. And within that, that's how I also see that politics is formed, which is politics meaning the way that we live life and how we create, let's call it guidelines, ways, norms that become just an ingrained aspect of our new human nature. For example, as human beings, we decide that the best thing is to share, to give to everyone the best living condition, then that, if we integrate it into our educational systems, then we won't have to do the whole political campaigning deception that is going on now, because people, kids from the very early age, will know what is best for all. Yeah. What is the best way to live, to coexist, to get to agreements, to share, to be able to converse, to know that no one has to be the winner and the loser, but that we can all get to a commonsensical way of living in a decent manner, of not fighting for everyone, for everything, and with everyone. So if we do that at an educational level, we will prevent a lot of the mess that we're seeing right now as our crisis, and people fighting from political parties to one another, and that's really like a consequential aspect of not really placing our effort into placing the solutions at an educational level. So guys, we're reaching like the end of the Hangout, and I know that there's a lot of things to be said about this topic, and we will probably try and give it continuation from the various branches that this vast topic has. But
Yeah.
for now, I'd like you both to share some conclusions in terms of solutions. You've shared partly it, but if there's further points that you'd like to share, by all means, go for it. So let's start with you, Anna. What's your perspective or final conclusion on this topic?
Yeah, so a question that I've seen coming up in people's minds when we present the solution through education is this question of saying, but is what you're saying, is that not also a new form of indoctrination? So my answer to that question and the solution that I would like to propose is that no, for two reasons. So first of all, children and everyone, but children first and foremost, because they're the future, have to grow up with an equal vocabulary, with an equal understanding of the world, which means to learn how to read and write equally, to have their unique abilities be honored and respected, so that they learn to be able to critically assess the world, so that no one tells them that this is how it is and you just have to accept it. But to encourage them to ask questions, encourage them to do research, show them how to be critical, because through that, no one will be able to manipulate with them. To show them, teach them to have self-integrity, to not go over their own boundaries, to be able to feel in their own bodies what happens inside of it. Okay, so that would be the one point. The other point would be that what we're talking about here in terms of what is best for all are, like I said before, it is these very basic, simple things. Martijn was talking about sharing, and what I was thinking was, but we have to share. We cannot not share, and this is exactly the kind of mindset that is destroying our world, that people think that it's possible to exist in this world without sharing. It's so commonsensical, and the cool thing about this is that children, if anyone in this world gets that, children do. So all we have to do is simply actually as adults educate ourselves and find out, okay, but what does it mean to share? And find out all the ways that we can discuss sharing and show sharing, or show examples of what would it mean to not share. So that is a huge responsibility on the part of us as adults, to not just perpetuate what we have been taught, but to actually challenge our own opinions, our own beliefs continuously. And then, there are tools in the world, like learning how to read and write, learning how to access a lot of different information, cross-reference with various sources, that will assist an individual to become critical and to be able to assess information for themselves. With that in hand, we can create a system where it's not possible to manipulate people or coax them into a mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and that's something that very much I would encourage, not only, as you're saying, teachers, parents, but each one of us, just considering that this is not far-fetched, this is something that begins here as an acceptance of this. Yeah, this is a solution that can be created, and so let's do it. And this begins by creating the information, placing it out there, conversing with our peers, and letting people realize this solution in essence. So, Martijn, would you like to share your last perspectives and conclusions, also based on this political aspect?
Yes. That's one good point about the basic income or the living income, that it is more based in giving than in taking. Economy is always taught in the way of how can I get the most money, how can I get the most profit. And the basic income is more based on giving. Give everyone the opportunity to live a decent life by giving them the money to do so. And in that, they give the money to the the business people who do the trading, and so you get another, more like the children who naturally share. We get a society based on giving and sharing, an economy based on that. So.
Yeah, and that would be certainly like a way to shortcut the entire process that we have to kind of be focusing on now, which is as adults now getting to accept this idea that it is possible to change, but we certainly are witnessing the consequential processes, the crisis, etc. But there's children still coming into this world, so if anything, we have to also focus a lot on them and creating this sense of awareness, political awareness, not at a national level, but at a global level,
Yeah.
and for solutions for what is best for all. And that's very much what Living Income Guaranteed focuses on as well. Not only being able to provide to people this right to life, but also how are we going to make of this living standard part of our integrity as human beings, how we view the world, how we learn from the crib, so to speak, how to share, how to use the best way our resources, how to buy what we need, how to become the best living human beings that we can be, in essence. Because without that, there's no real progress, in essence. There cannot be real progress. So I thank you a lot, both of you, for being with us today. And I would like everyone that is watching to place questions, comments. If you're watching, if it's not live any longer, you can still place comments in the YouTube video. Remember to subscribe to our channel as well. We have these Hangouts every Sunday at the same time, and it's always featured in the Living Income Guaranteed Facebook page. The links will be in the information section. And we are broadcasting or sharing in the Showcase app now the links to Teacher's Journey to Life, which is Anna's website, as well as livingincome.me, which is where you can read the proposal of the Living Income Guarantee. So thanks a lot, Martijn, for being here.
Thanks, Marlen.
Thank you.
Bye.
And thanks a lot to you, the viewer, for being here. And we'll see you next time, next week at the same time for another Hangout. Bye-bye.